that I just haven't fully gone through it.
Yeah, well, no, because it's only a presentation, not designed to be, okay.
Okay. Well,
Yeah. John Suttle, Irish National Schools Trust. And the talk is called An Appalling Vista, just to relate back to Justice Denning, who left the Birmingham 6 in for 11 years on the basis that he was unwilling to consider the possible illegality of what was going on. And what we're talking about is the introduction of Catholics first and Protestant first admissions policies throughout the national school system, creating an apartheid society, happening particularly in Dublin today, but happening in other parts of the country, gradually spreading countrywide, but particularly in Dublin. I was doing a talk down in Limerick last week, and I just looked at the first 10 national schools on the internet, and 9 out of 10 have no religious discrimination, and just one in Caherline has a Catholics first admissions policy. I happened to be talking to a priest that evening. He said, well, actually Caherline, although it's only 12 miles from Limerick, is actually in a Tipperary diocese. So the Limerick...
When you say admissions policy, do they actually have that written into the admissions policy?
Well, there's admissions policy for every school, and they all do their priority. And the standard admissions policy is that children from the local area get in first, children from outside the area get in second, and if there's no subscription, the eldest get in first. That's the standard admissions policy that's been around for 200 years, and all of these have that policy, except for this one, which has the standard one that's in Dublin nowadays. Sorry, it's 25 minutes if we hold the things for until the end. Okay, and this is the only thing I'm going to read here. This encapsulates the whole ethos of the national school system, written by Catholic bishop in 1830 to the Parliament in England, which was considering setting up a school system for the poor in Ireland. And it was used again in 2012 by the National Union of Teachers and others in England to try and stop the religious segregation that's happening in England. And it's very good. I do not see how any man wishing well to the public peace and who looks to Ireland as his country can think that peace can ever be permanently established or the prosperity of the country ever well secured if children are separated at the commencement of life on account of their religious opinions. I do not know any measure which would prepare the way for a better feeling in Ireland than uniting children at an early age and bringing them up in the same schools, leading them to commune with one another and to form those little intimacies and friendships which often subsist through life. Children thus united know and love each other, as children brought up together always will, and to separate them is, I think, to destroy some of the finest feelings in the hearts of men. And that captures the ethos of the whole national school system as it should be. In 1831, the following year, Edward Stanley set up the national school system with the Stanley Letter written to the Duke of Leinster, and the provisions of the Stanley Letter are system of national schools, banishing any suspicion of proselytism. Children of all persuasions should be together in the same school with no interference in their religious beliefs, with combined literary and separate religious instruction to ensure that people of different religions can attend the school. You might note that it was designed for the poorer classes of Ireland. There were an awful lot of private schools around at the time, and it was always imagined that a lot of people would still be sending their children to private schools. And the board, now the minister, should exercise a complete control over the various schools. It was begun in 1831. By 1860, just 30 years later, it had 5,600 schools, 804,000 pupils. Wouldn't we love to see a government with that sort of ambition nowadays to do that in 30 years? And the system, this encapsulates the legality of the national school system, which has two pillars. That children of all religions should be together in the same school with separate religious instruction to accommodate those different religious beliefs. We will look at, there's just a few foundation documents from this national school in Clontarf. We're from Clontarf, and this particular aspect, this is a foundation document for the school, and this question asks here, will the school be bona fide open for children of all religious denominations? And the answer is yes. And the answer is yes in every national school. And this is the basis of looking for recognition, looking for state funding, is that commitment to be bona fide, and that's in every national school document. Here we have a look at how they separated religious instruction. So secular instruction was to be for 4 hours a day, and religious instruction to be for half an hour each day. Another myth is that all the schools were set up by the Catholic Church. This simply is not true. It's generally they were set up by local contribution. This school here in Clontarf was set up by John Edward Venables Vernon, a famous Protestant local landlord, and he was the patron for the first 50 years, and he appointed the Catholic parish priest as the manager of the school. The Powell's Commission then, 40 years after the system was set up, had a look at the system and how it had happened, what had happened. And what had happened was that children tended to go to schools where the teacher was of their religion. And the system had become very denominational in that 90% of the schools were attended by only one religious denomination. The Catholic hierarchy, although it was very enthusiastic for about the first 5 hours or 5 years, lost enthusiasm, as did all the others. And they insisted that children not go to school under Catholics not go to school with a Protestant teacher. So it was very divided. The Powell's Commission recommended that the state should reconsider and perhaps support denominational schools. Gladstone took some advice and refused to do that and kept the same system. In 1870 to 1920, as we moved from there up to independence, by 1900 we had 9,000 schools, and the 3,200 national schools in place today are very largely successors to these schools that were set up by 1900. And although it had become quite denominational, the legality had not changed at all. So the system remained legally the same as we came to independence. And in the foundation document of the state, the Anglo-Irish Treaty, I don't know if you've ever read it, it's only 18 clauses, only 3 or 4 pages. There's only one social clause in it. The rest of them are political, military, financial. And the social clause is to carry into the new state an agreement between Westminster and the new state that they would carry the national school system into the new state. This was copied into the 1922 Constitution, which we see here the right of any child to attend a school receiving public money, which is the system which remains today. It went into the 1937 Constitution, exactly the same. Another thing that a myth is that parents have a right to a denominational school, and they do have a right to a denominational school in Article 42.1 and 42.2. But you'll see in both cases they talk according to their means or in private schools. So the right to a denominational school is privately funded because the system was designed to cater for the poor, not for everyone. So even when I was a child, there were a lot of private primary schools. There are very few left now, but there are 55, I think. But there is a right to a denominational school and privately funded. But when we come to state-funded national schools, the right to, as regards religion, is conditional. So under Article 42, it guarantees the right of parents to privately funded denominational, guarantees that publicly funded schools will be available for everyone, but it does not guarantee publicly funded denominational schools. So if you're like me and you're brought up Catholic and you brought up your children as Catholic and the local school is Catholic, we actually got a state-funded denominational education. But if you weren't a Catholic, if you were Muslim, Hindu, atheist, you went to the school my children went to, but obviously you didn't get any religious instruction there. Now the more important article is 44.4, which has been widely explored, and this bans the state from providing any state aid to schools where there is any question of the right of the child to attend that school being limited by their religious beliefs. This has been ruling in the Supreme Court, and Judge Barrington, and Owen Daly is the leading academic at the moment, and this is a report done by the Equality Authority in 2012, 2013, all of which support that same right, that every child has a right to attend and to withdraw from religious instruction. So the system after the 1937 Constitution was almost the same, except we had added and none, that the Stanley Letter had limited the rights to Christians, whereas the Constitution has widened that out to every child. So we became children of all religions and none together with separate religious instruction is enshrined in our present Constitution. Again, going back to that same school and the concept of Catholic national schools or Protestant national schools, this is the same school which got too small in Clontarf and moved from Vernon Avenue to Seafield Road, a much bigger premises, which is where it is now. And the premises were provided by Edward Kingston Vernon, the great-grandson of the previous landlord. The Verns are still very big landlords in Dublin, and at no cost. We have the lease here, which signed by John Charles McQuaid, which you're too young to remember, but you might have heard of him. He was the patron There's no mention in the lease of any religion, and it repeats again the object of national education to afford combined literary and moral and separate religious instruction to children of all persuasions as far as possible in the same school, upon the fundamental principle that no attempt shall be made to interfere with the peculiar religious tenets of any description of Christian pupils. Well, the Christians survived here, but the Constitution obviously outweighs anything else. There is a talk about this. There was separate religious instruction was very carefully done, even up to my time in the 50s, and this was a board that was on the door of every schoolroom in a national school, and it has religious instruction on this side when you were giving religious instruction, and if you turn it around on the other side, it has secular instruction. There's one of these. This is from that same school in Clontarf. There's one down in Bunratty Folk Park as well, I saw recently. Now we're up to 1965. Now this is, by the way, I have a long, this is the short version of this. The long version is an hour. In the 1965 rules, it gives explicit recognition to the denominational character of the school. So there is a denominational character to most schools, which is the religious instruction provided. So they either provide Catholic religious instruction, Protestant religious instruction, but really it's the Catholics really the only ones who provide full religious instruction, because the Church of Ireland schools and Presbyterian schools tend to take all Protestants, so it isn't quite the same. So it's only really in the Catholic Church. But it maintains the rule about having separate religious instruction. Again, it decreases here they have to be very careful to teachers in the presence of people not of the religion. That's gone, but the separate religious instruction remains, and again, this is a statutory instrument subject to legislation and subject to the Constitution. The integrated curriculum was introduced in 1971, which was to spread religious instruction throughout all parts of the curriculum. So if you were teaching maths, if you were teaching about triangles, you could talk about, we've got God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, to explain that there are three corners to God. But spreading that through the curriculum causes no problem to most people, but to the people that it does cause problem, it is a major issue. So this is where the first crack. The legal position had not changed with no legislation. There's a crack here in the separate religious instruction. It was no longer possible to withdraw effectively from religious education in the school. This was considered in 1996 by the Constitutional Review Group led by T.K. Whittaker, I think. And this particular section was done by Gerard Hogan, now an appeals court judge, and Anya Hyland. And they pointed out that the integrated curriculum was unconstitutional, that the schools were now in breach of Article 44 of the Constitution, and they recommended either the schools change or the Constitution be amended. They recommended that an amendment was not appropriate because we're now moving into a multicultural society, and that the schools should discontinue the curriculum, the integrated curriculum. That was 25 years after it was introduced. That integrated curriculum is still here today, which is another 19 years, so 44 years of completely uncontested illegality. In 1997, a deal was done, a secret deal done between the denominations and the Minister for Education. Now we can get no response from either Micheál Martin or Niamh Brannock as to who was involved, but the present Minister and the Catholic Primary School Managers Association indicate that there was a deal done to discontinue the national school system and to replace it with state-supported denominational system. And the way it was to be done was to change that lease that we saw earlier from 1943 by having a deed of variation attached to it. This is like changing a shop that has been designated to be a pharmacy into a hair salon. So you have a lease that says it to be a pharmacy, but they want to change to a hair salon, so you give them a deed of variation. Anyway, this has in you can find these. These are it has 32 mentions of Catholic in deed of variation and none in the lease. It was never debated in the Oireachtas. Boards of management have been told by the Catholic primary school managers that this deed of variation is in place for all schools. The reality is that, according to the minister, A few were signed prior to 2006, and none have been signed since then. So there's actually very few in place, and this is the basis for the whole Catholics First admissions policy, is this deed of variation. But they're actually non-existent deeds. They apparently went to the Attorney General's office, as far as we know, and were presumably told to be unconstitutional. We come to the 1998 Education Act, and here we have a look at people talk a lot about patronage nowadays, but patronage is in fact a very minor matter in the national school system. It is a position of obligation rather than rights. That there is an obligation on the patron. If you look at the 1998 Education Act, the patron section is very small. So most of the functions, the local functions, are carried out obviously by the principal, but also by the Board of Management. And really the patron's role is to ensure that the Board of Management maintains the ethos of the school. There's some concept that the patron defines the ethos. That's not the case. The ethos is defined by the school, and the board is obliged to uphold it, and the patron is obliged to see that they do. And this is the same with the admissions policy. It's not in the patron section, it's in the Board of Management section. And you'll see, actually, if you look at section 10, 11, 30 and 33, that absolute control, which was mentioned in the Stanley letter, remains in place, whereby the minister actually controls the schools, including in, I think, section 33, including regulations in relation to admissions. The Equal Status Act came in 2000, and section 7 of the Equal Status Act puts a blanket ban on all religious discrimination in admissions to schools. And if you remember back to Article 42 of the Constitution, that does allow for denominational, privately funded denominational schools. So section 73C was put in as very much an exception to the rule, which allowed for religious discrimination under very limited circumstances. And it's very limited, it's not a blanket thing at all, and it does not apply to many national schools. There's another section, but this would really be for people who might consider bringing a case. Section 12 makes it illegal to publish a discriminatory admissions policy. So whereas in a pub you can't have men only over the bar, equally you can't have Catholics first in a school, except under very limited circumstances, which, as I said, is probably two schools. I think CUS in Leeson Street is the only school I know that would definitely probably be allowed to avail section 73C. So now we come to 2001 and the introduction of these Catholics First admissions policies, and we now see no change in the legal position. Well, and the legal position is really defined by the Constitution, so regardless of the 1998 Educational Act or the Equal Status Act 2000, it's still legal. But we now have a crack in the second system, in that for the first time we have discrimination coming into the large bulk of schools, and particularly Dublin. The Ryan report details the widespread collusion between the Department of Education and the religious bodies that allowed for the long-standing abuse of children by clergy. And to our knowledge, there has been no protocols introduced in the Department of Education to deal with that conclusion of that report. We wrote a report back in 2011 called The Legal Religious Discrimination in National Schools in Ireland. It's useful in that it has all the relevant legislation. We hope to have a new one out maybe in a few months' time that's more up to date, and legally it's unchallenged to date. The Forum on Patronage and Pluralism was a fantastic forum introduced by Rory Quinn. If its recommendations had been implemented, 95% of the issues that we're talking about that people have to deal with today would have been dealt with. Unfortunately, none of the recommendations have been implemented. The only one that they are going for is this divestment, which is obviously a Catholic Church agenda developed by Archbishop Dermot Martin, because Catholic First admissions policies only work if you've got somewhere for the non-Catholics to go to. So having 8 Catholic schools in Castlebar means that they're all 85% Catholic and 15% not. If you introduce Educate Together, our community national schools, which we're very supportive of, it does unfortunately become schools for non-Catholics. The CPSMA, which is the Catholic Primary School Managers Association, who have been circulating this concept of the deeds of variation being in place, they asked for board members looking to find out what the ethos of their school, to look at 10 Catholic congregational documents, whereas we would recommend that you look actually at the foundation documents of the school. What the ethos school is defined in section 15 of the 1998 Education Act, but it certainly is not Catholic religious documents. It's foundation documents and traditions and records of the school is where you will find the ethos of the school. The Equality Authority did a draft report on the basis of this illegal religious discrimination report, and they again supported the concept that Article 44.2.4 does not allow for religious discrimination in admissions, and it notes that Section 7 of the Equal Status Act does not permit a blanket ban on all children not of the faith, which is what is in place. Now, you might note that this particular draft document, the person doing it had no access to foundation documents at all, which are very relevant. The Joint Oireachtas Committee pointed out that multiple patronage as a basis for policy can lead to segregation and inequality, which we would completely agree with. The Admissions to School Bill really just quoted Section 73C, didn't do anything in relation to admissions. Now these are the admissions policy, that's the standard admissions policy. Children in the catchment area, children outside the catchment area, and what to do when you're overloaded. Catholics First admissions policy is Catholics first, Catholics second, and non-Catholics within the area come in sector 3. So if the school is oversubscribed, non-Catholics do not get in. This is the instruction. This is just today, or well, it's not today. This is about a week ago. This is the instruction given out by the Catholic Archbishop of Dublin. Now you note that the patronage is not invested in the Catholic Church; it's vested in the individual of the Archbishop. And this is his instruction that the following decision-making process will apply: Catholics first, Catholics second, other children. Just to summarise, parental rights: you have right to a religiously exclusive school, but only privately funded. You do not have a constitutional right to send your children to a school that has religious exclusion. The state is obliged to provide for free primary education, but only in schools that are open to children of all religious denominations, and the state is specifically not allowed to provide funding to any school that has a Catholics First policy. Present trends: the term national school is disappearing. The present minister has never used it except in relation to rules for national schools, nor has Rory Quinn, and the denominational patrons however never used it. They talk about faith-based schools, primary schools, denominational primary schools, whereas national school is written in stone all over Ireland. There's a general acceptance of religious discrimination. People do not get very excited about it usually, even though it's very widespread. Children are being forced to change their religion. Children are being forced to accept religious indoctrination in schools today. The state is supporting religious discrimination for the first time. That's why we would suggest now that we're moving into an apartheid system, because for the first time the state is actually supporting it rather than being people voluntarily segregating themselves. And this is the legal position. Position is unchanged, largely from 1831, but the illegality is spreading quite vigorously now. We might note that the minister does not have the choice to say, well, I don't like this legislation, so I won't implement it. All ministers have a duty to implement legislation and constitutional provisions as they are now. If they want to change it, they have to get them amended. The immediate solution, or two immediate solutions: the minister could do a circular today simply saying, circular whatever 150 of 2015, in any school in receipt of any state funding or public money there shall be no discrimination in admissions policy on the basis of a child's or child's parents' religious belief or lack thereof. Could do this under 33G of the 1998 Education Act. That would be an immediate solution. A relatively immediate solution would be to add the Admissions to School Bill coming through now makes an amendment to the 1998 Education Act. That's the first thing it does in the proposal. They could actually then add an amendment also to Section 73C, and Section 73C would remain exactly the same except with the addition of this, saying this section shall not apply to any school in the receipt of any state funding or public money. And that is mentioned throughout the present bill as I've seen it. So that's it. That's the national school system.